Thanks for joining us. The old Rio Grande train station is one of the most iconic buildings in Salt Lake City, but it's been closed to the public since the earthquake of 2020.
With repairs and other changes underway, some say now is the time to reimagine the state-owned building. That's the topic I dug into for our latest 360 report.
I think there's a lot to figure out, but it's just such a venerable landmark that people recognize that it has to be preserved. It has to be used for the future.
State Representative Stephen Handy loves the old Rio Grande building.
Unfortunately, the building is old. The earthquake of 2020 didn't do it any good.
Trains no longer stop here, but the building has served a variety of uses in recent years. A popular restaurant used to occupy the north wing. A state history research center filled the south wing, and offices occupied the second floor. The basement, which was always off limits to the public, is where the state's historic treasures were stored. Thousands of items worth millions of dollars.
What's happened is those things have all been moved out into storage somewhere, into safe storage.
The legislature has approved funding to build a state history museum on the grounds of the state capitol, where people will finally be able to see those items. In the last legislative session, Representative Handy also helped approve funding for a feasibility study to consider possible future uses for the now mostly empty Rio Grande, where earthquake damage is being repaired.
It's certainly a Salt Lake City, Utah landmark that needs to be preserved in some shape or way.
We're not sure if the research center will come back there in some form.
Jill Love is the executive director of the Utah Department of Heritage and Arts, which oversees state history.
Because of some of the criminal activity that's been happening in the Rio Grande neighborhood over the last decade, we literally had to build fences and lock the building to the public during the day just for our employees' safety. Many of those issues have been addressed, and we're really excited that the fences can come down and that we can really brainstorm and dream about how that building can become an activated space for the community.
Among the early ideas,
and there's lots of wonderful things like a festival street on 3rd South that dead ends at the Rio Grande.
Through the winter, where our summer market is in Pioneer Park, our winter market is traditionally in the Rio Grande building. But because it is under renovation right now, we're at the gateway, but we hope to be back in that building.
Dee Brewer is the executive director of the Downtown Alliance.
We've been producing the farmers market for 30 years, and the momentum just keeps growing. The sales this year are higher than ever before.
He says Utah farmers and Salt Lake consumers are ready for a permanent marketplace on a bigger scale.
There would be additional infrastructure that would be put in place. I'd refer you to Pike's Market in Seattle, or Ferry Station in San Francisco, Grand Central in LA.
So reimagining these spaces instead of tearing down these spaces, I think is the way to go, and that's the ideal way to really build a solid foundation of our history and our future.
Jacqueline Briggs is the marketing director of the nearby Gateway, which has a historic train depot of its own, the Union Pacific, which is set to become part of a new hotel.
The historic portion of the building will be the lobby. And then there are 25 guest suites that are within the historic center. The new build will be the guest towers on the outside.
She doubts a similar project would take shape at the Rio Grande and thinks the city would benefit more from other uses.
I think a place where people can see art, see performances, and just really expand on that arts and culture heartbeat that is Salt Lake City.
That building should be integrated with the surrounding neighborhood.
Between the Rio Grande to the east and the intermodal hub to the west, the University of Utah, with support from Salt Lake City's redevelopment agency, is making plans to transform the two city blocks into something called the Innovation District, essentially blending academic, living, and commercial uses.
You would need to have a neighborhood there, and we think a market will be a part of that.
We know in historic preservation circles that the best preservation tool is activation, that a historic building is being used at its highest and best use. And that's what we hope for this building.
Possibilities and proposals are in the early stages. There are likely other ideas yet to come. Ultimately, the state, which owns the Rio Grande, will have the final say on what happens.
I would think we're talking at least a minimum of a couple years. It's just how long these things take.
We will continue to keep you up to date on any developments and decisions that come about regarding the Rio Grande on air and online at fox13now.com.